Welcome to the Farming on Purpose podcast, a podcast for farmers and ranchers ready to shift for a stronger future. Today's challenges in agriculture are new, but the grit and determination required to be successful are not. On the Farming on Purpose podcast, you'll hear how producers of all sizes and practices are moving mountains for things they believe in, all in the name of an industry that keeps growing and innovating for a stronger food system and stronger farm families. I'm your host, Lexi Wright, and I'm excited to discuss where producers are finding success, challenging the status quo, striving for better, and keeping our heritage alive, all while producing the food we depend on.
Can we take just a second to talk about your business? You already know your business inside and out. You've built something worth talking about. But when it comes to marketing, it can feel like you're stuck. You don't know what to say, where to show up, or how to turn followers into customers. I know because I've been there. That's why I created the 8-hour marketing plan class. Think of it as your personal roadmap built just for you in just one day of focused action. You bring your passion and your business know-how and use our step-by-step video process to craft your strategy to help you reach the right people and grow your business. This process helps you get around second-guessing, wasted time, and feeling overwhelmed. We create a clear plan that fits your business, your life, and gets results. You're the expert in what you do. Let us help you build a plan to show it off. Jump into the 8-hour marketing plan class at backpocketsocial.com/8 hours. That's backpocketsocial.com/8 hours.
Welcome back to Farming on Purpose. Today, I have Robby Sansom here. Robby is a co-founder and the CEO at Force of Nature, which is a regeneratively sourced meat company out of Austin, Texas. And his roots are in the natural food community, pretty deep. Previously, you were the CFO and COO at Epic, which I think everybody recognizes from the protein bars, the meat-based protein bars. Robby spent much of the last decade studying regenerative ag at ranches all over the world. And through that education, Force of Nature was co-founded with the intention to accelerate the creation of a global regenerative supply network, which is fascinating. Given all of the supply chain issues that have been a thing in the world in the last few years. Force of Nature works in partnership with land stewards, ranchers, and farmers to create positive returns on the planet. And he, like I said, is from Austin, Texas. And I'm just really excited to hear about Force of Nature and then also your own ranch, Rome, where you raise regeneratively managed bison. So I think that there are so many things that we're going to be able to talk about today. Robby, welcome to the show. Why don't you give us a little bit of a background on how you got started in ag and how you got to where you're at and what you're doing now?
Well, thanks for having me, Lexi. Appreciate the opportunity to talk with your audience and talk with you. I think you covered a fair bit of my background, but I guess I'm more on the personal side. I am from the Hill Country region of Texas, and spent much of my childhood and youth running around either in the public spaces. We have really cool greenbelt in Austin, or a family that has land in the Hill Country, and doing really small scale production. And spending time hunting and fishing and just trying to maximize time spent in wild places and away from the buildings and the concrete. I went to a large university. I went to the University of Texas for undergrad and graduate school, and followed a path down, getting a business degree in undergrad and grad school. And then went to work for large scale consulting for big businesses and all these sort of things that I thought might lead to, what you would probably think of, call success, right? Okay. Big, all the bigness, implying something maybe even greater than the reality. And I don't think it took long for me to realize that the rat race and the pursuit of profit, with no real value or substance was behind it necessarily, was an unfulfilling pursuit for me. And pretty quickly found myself back on working in more of the startup environment, where you're more closely connected to a mission, more closely connected to ideas that are based on values that promote alignment between business and consumers or customers, and all the while trying to continue to foster my passions for the outdoors and activity. He loved to run and bike, and was doing races, and so kind of went down that path into health. Eating healthy food and healthy diets, and was really fortunate that all of my passions for business, for the outdoors, for wild places, for personal pursuit of achievement, and physical health and wellness all sort of collided with joining my friends Katie and Taylor, and kind of taking this vegan energy bar company that was called Thunderbird Energetica and turning it into a meat company that purveyed jerkies and meat bars, and was the first to market with bone broth and animal cooking fats and so many other really cool things. And so that was really the place where it all kind of came together for me. And then of course, built experience in the consumer industry, the package industry, processing, manufacturing, and trying to be authentic and genuine and sincere, and understanding how do we deliver the best products that are the most healthy for consumers. Learning where those materials come from, and if they're animals, health, it's coming from healthy animals, and where are healthy animals coming from? Well, they're coming from healthy lands where they're allowed to exhibit their evolutionary consistent behaviors, and in optimal circumstances to promote their own health, which generally comes from healthy land and healthy ecosystems that are functioning and producing healthy soil, and so on. And so, again, it's a long journey with rabbit holes that have rabbit holes within them, but eventually that got us to spending a lot of time and energy in building these sort of systems, and ultimately, segueing from Epic into Force of Nature, where we could take that very same mission and set of values and transition it from ounces to pounds. And with Force of Nature, what I would say we are doing is taking the culmination of our 15 years down this path and trying to synthesize it into more palatable and more practical experience for consumers. So I always say, we're trying to create awareness to critical issues in food and food production that are important to consumers. Not tell them what to think, but just pull the curtain back where they have been shielded from the truth, and share reality with them, and then let them, based on their own values and beliefs, and accurate and transparent information, choose a path that and supporting a production model or a set of values that most closely aligns with theirs. And so I call that awareness and access. Awareness of issues and access to an alternative to what they may be. They may be currently supporting intentionally or unintentionally. And then on the other side, that builds demand for higher attribute practices and proteins. And that demand sends signals into the industry that does a handful of things, not the least of which is help justify and lessen the burden for producers on the other end of the front lines to take risks and lean into some uncertainty or something less conventional than what they have historically seen or done, and justify or validate the opportunity that is there if they make a shift, that the reward for that risk is in place. And not only does it do that for the producers, farmers, ranchers, but it also sends signals to the larger players in the industry that have created many of the incentives that make it difficult to break out of the most conventional model and mold. That, hey, consumers in the age of information and truth and transparency are voting with their dollars, and they're saying we expect something, or we desire something different. And I think that sort of incentive is a good thing. Even for the large meat industry incumbents that we might call big bad actors, they're going to look to the market and they're going to say, hey, if consumers are telling us they don't want certain, they don't want products that come from certain systems or have certain attributes or carry, that produce certain externalities, we're not going to want to make the products they don't want, and so those signals are heard, and it leads to true and legitimate change and transformation that I think is virtuous, and I think creates a rising tide for the folks that are, incumbents in the industry, and then folks that really want to be, enter into the industry, or folks that have been in it for a while and want to make change.
That's a lot. And I think it makes me want to get ahead of myself a little bit and dive into some of those questions you bring up. But before we get to some of the more complex issues of like food choice and practices and all of these things that are influencing the food system that we currently have, whether we think about them every day or not. First, let's start with one. You said that the company that you originally had a lot of vegan energy. I'm just curious, how do you go from that to all protein, regeneratively sourced beef and meat?
I don't know that it had a lot of vegan energy. It was a vegan energy bar. Think of like a Laura bar, date paste and fruits and nuts and seeds. And that's, what my co-founders, the company, Katie and Taylor had started, and they were triathletes and were trying to be really thoughtful and intentional in how they cared for themselves and the world around them. And I think there's a value set and a dogma that goes hand in hand with the vegan ideology. And that was really popularized in the early 2000s and early 2010s. And there's a lot of people, a lot of the most vocal carnivore diet advocates of today tried veganism. A lot of the most popular advocates of the paleo diet and the, people that would consider themselves biohackers on that spectrum of the health space, spent a stint as vegans, because that is what, we were told. And of course, I think so many people learned and realized firsthand that diet does not deliver on many of the promises, although the promises are, I would say, virtuous. Hey, who wouldn't want to pursue something that is healthier for you and has a better impact on the environment and the world around you, and is more thoughtful and considerate on the ethics related to welfare and other sort of considerations in the food system? Those seem completely legitimate reasons to want to pursue a path. Now, when you find out that the vegan diet for most people generally doesn't deliver on better health for them. In fact, it leads to a myriad of challenges, common and unique for both men and women. And Katie and Taylor were no different, from inflammation to GI issues to, all sorts of other things. We have employees on our team that tried the vegan diet as well now, and had fertility issues and hair issues and other health issues. I mean, the list just goes on and on, where it really falls short of the promises. And I think the same is said for on the environmental and on the welfare front. I don't think the cornerstone. Well, I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole, but I think the recognition, that was just an important part of the journey, and candidly, going from that perspective to recognizing, hey, in order to overcome these health challenges and these issues that we're facing, we need to and want to reincorporate meat. But we are told, and again, in some cases, rightfully, given how far down the wrong path we may have gone with the most industrialized versions of animal agriculture and plant agriculture. In some cases, the animal agriculture industry has been villainized, in many cases wrongfully. And again, there's nuance and it's complex, and there's a broad spectrum of practices in between. And so going from that, those values and philosophies to, okay, how do we reincorporate animal protein not only into our diet, but maybe, pivot an entire company and rebrand it and rename it and go and double down on what you would think would be the antithesis, going from a vegan company to a meat company, but it's really not. Because that is what led us to, conservation, sustainable, and really regenerative agriculture, to help understand that, there is a path that delivers not just as good, but substantially better on all of those attributes, better for the consumer, better for the environment, better for welfare of animals, better for communities of people that are producing our food. And that is in the values and in the practices and in the ethos represented by regenerative agriculture and what it really stands for in its truest form. And so, I think we wouldn't have found that if there hadn't been that detour. However off track and misguided it may have been, it was visited for the right reasons and with the right intention, and it led to the outcome where we are now, where I think we have not just a response to the attacks on meat and the ability to combat the myths that are perpetuated around animal agriculture, but really to offer a better set of solutions where change truly is necessary.
Yeah. I think that it's really important to recognize that it is, for most consumers, a journey, and even for producers too, of you have this goal you're working towards and you're offered what seems like a good solution. Why not try it? Why not utilize the information you have at that time to do the best you can with it? And then we take that and we evolve. So a lot of this, I think, we hear these buzzwords like vegan and regenerative, and there's a lot of marketing surrounding those words that can influence people to do all sorts of things. Let's dive into what it actually means. So regenerative. How is regenerative ag different in practice, in ideology, and the end products that we see? Let's dive into the meat of that.
Yeah, I think the I might start with just the challenge of regenerative. I think it's much like many things in the agriculture industry. There are many different opinions and perspectives on what it is or should be, and because we live in a reductionist society, there is a strong will and desire to try to define it in the simplest terms possible. And while that may be, from a market perspective, a reasonable approach, if you're looking to make, say, a claim that this is or isn't regenerative, that sort of distances it from or it risks creating a separation between the idea and the philosophy and whatever ultimate claim that we end up with. And I think a great example of that would be like the natural claim. I think in food, not just agriculture, animal agriculture, planet, but in food, a natural claim is probably the best claim that there is from a marketing perspective. I mean, what person or consumer out there doesn't have some idea of what natural is? And in reality, the claim is it's minimally adulterated after processing. It doesn't amount to much technically or otherwise. And so I think it's a bit misleading. And when you take a concept that is pure and easy to understand and even as simple as natural, you can see how quickly you can miss the mark and deviate from the course. And I think then you take something that's already complicated, like regenerative, and try to put it through the same machine, and you end up with something similarly off the mark. And so, like, what I'll talk to you about regenerative is like what it means from a philosophy and a set of practices and an ideology. And I think for your audience, who tends to skew maybe on the producer side, I would say in its simplest form, regenerative is a response to the most highly industrial, chemical agriculture system that we're left with today, where we hyper focus on some measures of output and overlook some consequences, whether those be environmental or whether they be in the nutritional profile of the food that we're producing, or the lack of diversity of the food that we're producing, or toxins that are showing up in the food that we're producing, or maybe most of all, since the Green Revolution, where all of this came about, the fact that farmers are losing their land and are in a state of despair like we haven't seen in a nation that was founded as a nation of farmers in hundreds of years. And so I think that system is really failing a lot of people in the supply network, from the front lines of the producers to the front lines of the consumers and many folks in between. And it doesn't mean that we need to disparage the intention to reduce costs and increase output. That was the origin story of the path that we came on. But it does mean that with some subtle shifts in understanding and changes in both mindset and practice, we can correct our course and go from producing negative externalities to positive outcomes on the grand scale pretty efficiently and without much effort, without really leaving or abandoning anybody behind. And again, potentially replacing a vicious set of outcomes with a virtuous set. And so, again, going back to the question, what does that really look like? What is regenerative? I'd say it's replacing that system with one that is more closely modeled after replicating nature and the functioning cycles and harmony that is fundamental to the biological realities of nature. Working within the carbon cycle, within the nutrient cycle, within the energy cycle, within the water cycle, and collaborating with nature as opposed to fighting against her will through mechanical disturbance or chemical disturbance. And there's some principles behind that. I think the principles of regenerative agriculture are often listed off as limit chemical and mechanical disturbance. Try to leave the ground armored, not bare. Bare soil exposes the soil itself to extreme temperatures. Very, very hot in the summer, very, very cold in the winter. Whereas when it's armored, you get you're able to mitigate that. You don't have those extremes that can kill off many of the necessary microbiology and compounds in the soil that promote life and produce better yields and outcomes. Also protects it from impaction from rain and from erosion. I mean, people don't realize how much. I think the farming community can recognize the importance of soil. Well, I don't think most people realize just how serious of a problem soil erosion is. Whether you believe it or not, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations made a statement a few years ago that said we only have 60 years of harvest left. And what that was pointing to is at our rate of soil loss globally, we will no longer have enough soil to maintain our agriculture and food production systems if we continue on the current path. Just in the United States, we're all familiar with the Dust Bowl, but these things seem so far in our past it's hard to really appreciate the significance of them. More recently, the last data that I saw was from the, I believe, 2014, 2015 timeframe, where with modern practices and understanding and the NRCS programs that exist, we've been able to get our soil erosion numbers down to 2 billion tons per year of erosion in the United States. Now, keeping in mind how important and valuable soil is to us, even in its present somewhat degraded state, it still takes over 500 years to create an inch of topsoil in nature. And the beauty and the bounty of our incredible production systems came from millions of years of natural processes that built this rich, thriving substrate that all of our food and all terrestrial life depends on. And losing that should be something that we're all concerned with. But what is the rate? What does 2 billion tons even mean? Well, if you take a pickup truck, doesn't matter, Chevy, Ford, whatever, Dodge, standard pickup truck, and you fill the bed up with soil, a giant mound, that's about 2 tons. So in order to get 2 billion tons, you need 1 billion of those pickup trucks lined up in a row. And if you want to know what that looks like from a to picture it and to actually begin to appreciate what that means a row of trucks wrapping around the equator over 150 times. So that's how much topsoil we're losing every year. So it's important to minimize practices that could compromise it or cause massive erosion. So, so like I said, leave the soil armored, leave it covered as much as possible. Leave green growing plants and living roots in the soil year round. I mean, photosynthesis is incredible. It's taking carbon out of the atmosphere where, debatably we have too much and it may be leading to some issues, but it's putting it back into the soil where undeniably we have too little. We have really mined the carbon and therefore the life out of our soils over the last generation or two. And photosynthesis is really important. And so leaving plants in the ground to do that job, the reason plants pop up is because they have a job and they have an important role and nature wants them there. Same thing with diversity. It's crazy to think we spray nitrogen on our fields when the atmosphere is 78% nitrogen, and there is an army of botanical warriors out there that can fix that nitrogen out of the atmosphere, from clovers to vetches to legumes to all sorts of other so again, diversity of plants, they have roles. Diversity of insects, they have roles. There are thousands of beneficial insect species for every undesirable species, and when we unselectively spray and terminate those, we lose all the positive ecosystem services that come from them. I would add animal impact. I think systems benefit from animals. I don't think we should have systems that are exclusively animals or systems that are exclusively plants. You don't see any natural ecosystems thriving where they're absent one of those two critical pillars. So there's a reason animals in historical contexts were considered keystone, because they were necessary and fundamental to function and health of those land systems. And then the last one is know your context. I think we tend to have a domination mindset on our land. We try to impose or force our will. And, there are certain places that we should be growing corn or soy. There are certain places that we are growing corn or soy that we should not. We definitely should not be trying to grow bananas in Alaska any more than some of the things we do. So understanding our context and doing things that are appropriate for the environment, but also, we're people and we try to produce food. So, we may not have capital. So that's part of our context. Or we may have, a lot of a community of people that want to help and a lot of children, or we may be rich in capital, or we may, have fencing anyway. So again, doing what's appropriate and right for your place. And so all of these are fundamental principles of regenerative. Do you have to do all of them to the most extreme degree to be regenerative? Or can you skip one or do the other? I mean, again, that is where the nuance comes into play. And ultimately, regenerative just means you're improving, you're regenerating from a degenerated state. You're regenerating and restoring health and vitality into a system. And that could mean that you're getting more ground cover. That could mean that you're eroding less soil. That could mean that you're seeing more species of birds or insects come in. It could mean that your biomass, or for the folks raising cattle, the amount of feed that you can produce per acre is improving. It can mean that you're infiltrating more water into the soil and that you're increasing your soil carbon. Why would that matter? Well, for every 1% soil carbon that you improve per acre, you can store an additional 20,000 gallons per acre. And so if you're in one of the, as is most common in the United States, where we've gone from maybe 7 to 8% soil organic matter down to less than 1%, you are losing the water storing capacity of hundreds of thousands of gallons of water per acre. How much more resilient would that make you to drought? And how much would it lessen and mitigate the devastating impacts of heavy rainfall if, instead of rain running off, you capture it and store it for whenever you have those arid periods? And so from a technical perspective, those are some of the ideals and values of regenerative and what you're trying to produce and why you're trying to produce it. You can see that it should also, as an outcome, in addition to regenerating the land, what you would hope from an enterprise perspective is a reduction in your input costs. You're not having to buy as much fertilizer, herbicide, fungicide, pesticide. You're not having to run the tractor as many times a year to till or apply any amendment. And so you can drive some cost savings there. You also see the nutrient density. When you have a healthier system, you can look to many different sources, but the quality of the food, the nutrient density, the profile, whether it be in animals or in vegetables or fruit, becomes healthier. We've all kind of heard that, our spinach has less iron, our oranges have less calcium than our grandparents, and so on and so forth. And this is all part of the, these are all some of the outcomes from the system that has kind of continued to mine the fertility of our systems without really restoring or replacing that fertility. I think of it as a checking account where you continue to cut checks without making any deposits. There's a limit to that, and eventually it ends pretty poorly. So, from a nutrient density, from a perspective, so you're able to, on a per acre basis, maybe produce more nutrition produce more crops, produce more food, and then drive more revenue streams for the farmer or rancher, all the while improving the legacy. And I don't know a farmer or rancher who doesn't want to improve their legacy and doesn't want to make sure that the next generation has more hope than they did and more opportunity than they did and a more valuable land base than they did. So you can build that value, that set of values back into the system in addition to resiliency, and feel really good about the impact you're having within your own legacy, but then also more broadly in the environment and the ecosystem, and not contributing to so many of a long list of negative externalities that really do tie strongly and closely back to agriculture. And the last thing I'll say on that final point is, when you think about the impact of agriculture, globally, agriculture is practiced on 10 or 11 billion acres out of around 30 billion acres that aren't covered in ice. So it's huge, a third of the navigable landmass of the globe. And then in the US alone, we're roughly 2 billion acres, and we practice agriculture on almost half of it. And so the impact we have, if it's doing any level of harm, is extreme. And the inverse is also true. The impact that we have, if we're replacing any of those systems with something that has a positive outcome or a positive impact, well, the good is extreme too. And so I think it's really important that we take to heart and we understand why and how there's so much enthusiasm and passion and momentum for this, because the opportunity, again, with some subtle shifts and changes, to do good is so profoundly encouraging and positive. And the reality of our present set of circumstances, after 70 or so years of racing down the path of the industrialization and the status quo, we've seen the good, and there has been some, but we've also seen the bad. And we're smart enough and capable enough and empathetic enough and technologically advanced enough to take those learnings and make the subtle adjustments that can help us, again, take that system from one that's spinning off many negative outcomes to one that could be creating profoundly positive outcomes.
It is complicated. I think you hit on so many valuable aspects there of what regenerative ag is and what it can be and what it can do. It's obviously very powerful, and we have there's science-backed data of what it can do and what it is capable of. What's hard to deal with, I think, for some people who might be listening, is we hear this term regenerative, which is becoming a movement, and it feels sometimes like farmers who are traditional or conventional are having a finger pointed at them and says, you did this, you broke the system, it's your fault. And for anybody who's been a farmer or a rancher and worked themselves to the bone every day, that's hard to hear. That's hard to be like, well, I'm just trying to feed my family. I'm trying to grow my business.
Barely making ends meet.
Yeah, barely keeping it alive for the next generation, hopefully. And in some cases, there's a lot of mental health complications that come with that too.
Does your business accept online payments, credit cards, or bank transfers? You're going to want to know about a tool called ThriveCart. I've been using this tool on my own website and on clients' websites for years and have been so happy with it. ThriveCart is a software tool you can use to design online checkouts with every option you can dream up. You can sell physical and digital products, connect to loads of other softwares you use for your website, accept payments, email marketing, and more. This is the most powerful tool that I use and the lowest cost one for my business. I recommend it for anyone who accepts online payments, who wants to increase their revenue or average order value on any type of product that you sell. In my show notes, you can find an affiliate link that I have for ThriveCart that gets you a great deal on a one-time payment, no subscription, and also allows me to earn affiliate income from this tool that I really enjoy and recommend. If you have any questions about how ThriveCart could work for your business, feel free to shoot me an email and I'd be happy to chat with you about it. Now, back to the show.
So how, for those folks who could be listening or have a family member that is in that situation, how do we make regenerative ag, which has all of these benefits, accessible to them and something that, they're willing to take a look at and see how it could work?
it's an important thing that you bring up, because I think, I don't think that the people who may feel as you just described or may identify as you just described, I think they are the problem. I think they are victims. When you look at a nation that in 1900 was 30% farmers and today is less than 3% farmers, what I see is a mass exodus and I don't think it was voluntary in all instances. I see a lot of failures. I see a lot of aging population of farmers. I see suicide rates in farmers. I see farmers not making it to the next generation, even when it's inherited free and clear. I see a lot of destruction of the credit of the people trying to exist in the system as it stands today, that simply preys on their credit. And you buy the new equipment, you buy the new technology, you invest in the new thing, and dig deeper and deeper into hole and more into an environment of hopelessness and maybe even helplessness. So, I listed off a lot of things and I touched on it very briefly, but not the least of which is a system that is failing the communities of people who produce our food, who I consider to be heroic. I mean, I don't know a whole lot of people out there that are, chemists and biologists and electricians and plumbers and veterinarians and, you list an incredibly long list of trades and skills, also sacrificing 7 days a week, 365 days a year to feed a thankless group of people, to ensure that their well-being is taken care of. I consider that to be a heroic pursuit, and I don't think the public really appreciates or understands just how critical and important that is, and how dangerous it is that our system is driving those people off of their land, away from their legacy. Fourth, fifth generation farmers failing, their sense of self-worth and identity collapsing around them, and being purchased by hedge funds and large conglomerates. I want humans, neighbors, Americans that have a heart and a soul and integrity and values making my food. And I want a system that serves them so that they can serve the rest of us. And I think that's, fundamental to the idea of this shift from a system that's failing them at the same time it's failing consumers, to one that gives them more hope and more opportunity. And so what would I say to them? Back to your question, I would say if you see the signs, if you look around and see your neighbor having sold their land, or your community in a state of decline, and your own bottom line and your own efforts having, spiraling in one direction, I would say don't wait until it's too late. I think oftentimes, sadly, people do transition to regenerative, thankfully, but it was out of desperation because it was a Hail Mary and there was no other option. And then I would say, be open-minded, be aware that, people aren't pointing their finger at you. They're pointing their finger at a system that, you may be a part of, but it isn't about you. Again, that system may be one that is doing a disservice to you. And I would say that's a fact. I think that there is you mentioned a movement or a groundswell and momentum behind regenerative. That is true in the markets and with consumers, but it's also true with producers as well. And so I think there are communities, and today more than when I started 15 years ago, and nobody could even say or had heard of this word. There are small and large organizations that want to support you in understanding what it might look like in your context. This is not something that you do suddenly and overnight. This is something that you do thoughtfully and slowly, and you make changes both in your mindset, but also in your practices. And there are resources that are local to you. You may be on the West Coast, and hearing what somebody did in the Northeast is probably not so valuable for you if you're in an arid climate or if you're in the North or the South. But there are people undoubtedly in your community on this path already. And so that sort of relationship and collaboration and support, and even from not-for-profits or for-profit organizations that want to provide guidance and consultation, they're abound. They're everywhere for you. So there is hope, and there are resources. And I would say, turn to those, look for those. And look, if you decide not to make change because what you're doing works, that's fine too. I may not agree with that or prefer that, but it's not for me to decide for you. It's for you to decide. And I want you to make sure that you're, just as I want for consumers, that you're fully aware of what's going on around you and what the opportunities are and what your circumstances and your context is, and that you have the ability to make the best choice for you and the best choice for your goals and your values and what you want to see for the future of your land and for the generations that will follow you in the pursuit.
I think that awareness piece for both the producer and the consumer is the meat of the issue of understanding where we are and how we got here and what options we have to move forward. And I want to come back to that, but I want to touch on something else you said there, that, this isn't something you decide to do overnight. It's not a quick decision. Transitioning to regenerative is a big step. So if someone has come to the conclusion that this is a good option for them, how do they do that affordably? Where do they turn to for resources to get started? What's kind of that first few steps?
Yeah, again, I would say, not to sound hyperbolic, but we'll just use chemical use as an example. If an alcoholic tries to stop drinking cold turkey, it could be extremely harmful. There's a process for it, and so again, I wouldn't say drop everything, spend all your time and money, and go all in on everything. I would say look to some people that have made some of the transitions around you, and again, model after them and do things slowly. We're talking about ecological time here. This is measured in millennia and millions, not in days and years. And usually it takes probably something like 7 years to not see the benefit, but to just like see night and day how profoundly a system is able to recover and begin to actually thrive in a new context. And you see major and marked improvements in the first year and in the second year and so on. But again, you have to be really thoughtful with what you do, so you don't end up pulling the rug out from under yourself. There are some really great organizations out there that are already doing this. Savory Institute, Understanding Ag, the Rodale Institute, Noble Research Institute, the Audubon Society, Nature Conservancy. I mean, there's a long list of organizations that have a presence all across the United States. I think there's something like 3,000 counties, and it seems like each year 2,000 of those counties declared federal emergencies for drought. So you're not alone, and there's people out there that are aware of the issue that are working through it. So I'd look to one of those, or I'd look in whatever agriculture periodical or paper that you get, or I'd follow. If you're in the younger generation or are inclined to do so, get on social media and follow some of those organizations, or follow some of the people that are writing about these topics and are employing some of these practices, and ideally and again, closer proximity to you. So some of those are free resources, and some of those are paid resources, and that can be right or wrong for you, right? Your curiosity might start on a path of free, and you might recognize that there is a return on and value in making an investment to a group that has that'll come and provide services to help you improve your confidence and maybe accelerate your learning and de-risk the investment as you make changes. But I think it all starts with mindset. It all starts with doing the things to understand and build confidence and adjust your why. Why are you doing it? Why, once you get that right, once you're centered on what you're looking for and why you're pursuing it and what it's worth to you, the other things start to fall into place, because you're doing them to serve yourself, not sort of against your own will because you feel compelled. I would caution you though, that, I think I sometimes see a very much kind of transactional, okay, if I spend $1 to make this adjustment, I expect $1 back from the market. And it doesn't work like that. It's not like you go get a certification and immediately that certification pays for itself. Sometimes that happens. And by the way, you don't have to have a certification. You do not need a third party to validate whether you are or aren't doing these things to necessarily reap the benefit. But I would say when you make these adjustments, the benefits, there are financial benefits for sure in a variety of ways. And some of it is in a premium, but not all of it. And that tends to be the expectation. That's the minimum sort of if then. But there's other benefits, right? If you can produce more revenue by having more revenue streams, more crops, more outputs, I think, again, reducing costs, improving resiliency and flood and drought and extreme conditions, on and on, a lot of the things I listed. And so I think I would recognize that if you're only wanting to do it transactional, if you don't really care, if your why isn't anything other than I just want to do as little as possible to get a claim that generates more money than it costs me, it's probably not the right path for you. And you should still do the research to determine what is your true motivation and drive. But that's one that I feel like that can mislead folks in the near term. I think in the long term, actually, it does really work out that way too. But if you expect it in year 1 or year 2, it may disappoint you, may not. Again, it all depends on your system and circumstance.
I think that's a really good point to bring up. And it taps into, for many producers, the fear of the unknown. They understand the risks of the current system that they're using. They don't necessarily understand the risks of a 7-year process of transitioning to regenerative potentially before they may see the real, like you said, they're going to see benefits before that, but that it could take quite a while before they truly begin to see huge impacts. And
if you only focus on one measure, you might miss the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
Is the point I was trying to make there.
Yeah. And I think that that's important because that is how a lot of producers think. We gauge how well the farming year was by how much money's in the bank account or how quickly we can pay off that operating note, or hopefully at least decrease it enough so we can buy inputs for next year. And so
I do think, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Lexi, but I do think I would recommend Gabe Brown's book, Dirt to Soil.
Mm-hmm.
If listeners haven't read that or you haven't talked about it on the podcast before, specifically as it relates to making a transition from conventional to more regenerative and understanding the nuance. And I just think he does a really great job of telling his story and his challenges and how difficult it was for him, but how remarkable and rewarding it was in the end, and what he's been able to do and produce. I think that is a wonderful testimony to this part of the conversation that we're having.
Yeah, and I think that's a great recommendation. I just think it's important to address those concerns because I know that in the back of people's head, those are the objections of, well, I could never make that work for me because of this, because my operating note is due, because it would take me too long. My farm would be lost in year 2. Things like that. That's what producers are wondering if they are scared of, if they're thinking about trying regenerative. And so, like you said, reaching out to some of those organizations that can help you make this transition and do it in a way that is smart for your operation is going to be a huge asset.
There's also, oh my goodness, I think is it Peter Bick doing a docu series called Roots So Deep. I think that was particularly interesting. He does a few really cool things. One is he goes to a handful of different regions across the country, and he finds usually a couple or a family that is practicing more conventionally, and in the same area, a neighbor practicing more regeneratively. And then they look at anecdotal, they look at scientific data on, again, carbon, water, and they look at all the financials of the farms, the input costs, the yields, the daily gains, the stocking densities. And they do all kinds. It's really, really fascinating to see. And I think why that might be most applicable to this conversation is because time and again, you see on all the critical measures, the regenerative operation. And this is done without villainizing or degrading or insulting either party. I think it's meant to be extremely collaborative and supportive of both. But when you look at your neighbor getting a higher output than you with spending $150,000 a year less in fertilizer, that makes a difference for some of these people. You get to see them experience that recognition and that journey. Or, one family, they do a bird survey, and their neighbor has over 60 species of birds and they have 2. And the lady breaks down and is like, I had no idea that we were creating an environment that birds didn't want to be in. And so you don't know what the motivating factor is or what the measure that's important. But I think that's a great example, because there are people just like those listening that are unsure and uncertain, are open-minded, are wonderful. The best of the best people that this country has to offer, regardless of practice, learning along with us and with you, and seeing, again, across a variety of measures, where there is what it looks like in their community and what the potential could or could not be. And I think it's a 4-part series. They're like, or maybe longer, and they're like an hour or 2 each. It's a lot of really, really cool information. And so, again, you can read about it. You can find it on the internet. There's documentaries and stuff. That's a really good one. I think that one is kind of like profound and compelling for folks that may be interested, but kind of have angst and fear based on, as you noted, their present circumstances, where it's already touch and go. And if they take a risk that's too big, that could be the end of the line for them. And that's the very thing we're trying to avoid for all of those folks in that circumstance.
Absolutely. I'll have to check out that docuseries. I haven't heard of that one before. Well, I think that down that rabbit hole, I kind of lost my train of thought. I think that brings us back to the awareness piece of how do we make this accessible for farmers? How do we make it accessible for consumers? Like you said, sounds like there's some really great literature and things out there that maybe can help farmers make this topic more accessible as a something to guide their decision. But what about consumers? Because we use lots of buzzwords again in food marketing. How do we help them understand what regenerative really is and the benefits of it versus just another all natural, organic, all the words that we're told to look for on packaging?
Yeah, this is kind of a favorite topic of mine, and something I'm going to be spending a lot more time focusing on going forward. And I don't have it all organized in my head exactly how I want it, let alone in practice. But I think the way the system is currently structured and the incentives are currently laid out, an environment around topics like claims, sometimes is helpful, but oftentimes it also does a disservice to both producers and consumers, by adding cost and complexity without ultimately always delivering on what the consumer at the end is intending or expecting. We talked about natural as an example of that, a little bit, and depending on your position, a lot bit misleading. I think it will be, regenerative has a lot of syllables and it sounds like it comes out of a lab. So I think it's going to have a bit of a PR challenge with consumers, unlike organic, which, again, means a bunch of different things, but it probably resonated a little bit more with what sounds like natural. And so I think convincing a swath of consumers to understand, let alone care about regenerative, is really difficult. I would also add, organic is an interesting point to make, because over the last 20 or 30 years, the organic has grown. Sales of organic products have grown about 8 or 9% a year, up to roughly a $60 billion industry today. That's not small potatoes. In the grand scheme of food and agriculture, it may be relatively small compared to the whole. But that's a lot. I think a lot of us would consider that to be a lot. And all of that in a world where I don't think those consumers supporting those, you look at the consumer research, it depends on state, but some 70 to 80% of consumers will buy an organic product. That's a giant portion of the population. And why? Do you think they can recite the organic standard? Do they think they even know what organic means? No, they don't. They just know it's better. or they might know that it broadly means chemical free, or you know, they again, they're not experts on the topic, but it was a familiar sounding word, and I don't think regenerative has that benefit yet. I think a lot of people are giving it credit because they understand it as the next and better thing, early adopters and folks that are really investing the time and energy, but that's not everybody. And so, I would say more than on the consumer front, I think what's more important than trying to convince people to understand, let alone care about regenerative, is basically taking what people already care about and connecting them to that. Do you care about welfare? Do you care about feeding your family the healthiest food that is rich in the most valuable things and absent in the most toxic things? Do you care about the people that are producing your food? Do you care about pollinators? Do you care about, weather patterns, or, whatever the issue may be for you? It turns out that the regenerative system generally best delivers on favorable outcomes for that set of values. And so, for me, it's more like saying, hey, I want to invite you into this conversation about a topic that you already care about and help you understand the status within the food production industry of that issue. And that if this is really important to you, the best path to go and pursue to, again, feed yourself or to invest in through your purchasing and support of a system that aligns with your values is down this path. And regenerative is a small part of that. I think if you want to, kind of pivot the conversation into technical claims, regenerative is just a single claim about a positive outcome in the environment. Chemical-free production systems would be a separate claim. High animal welfare treatment would be a separate claim. The living protocol of, say, pasture raised would be a separate claim. A feeding protocol of, say, 100% grass fed is a separate claim. So there's a long list of, technical regulated claims that I think have value and relevance in the market. They all have positives and pros and cons and risks and benefits associated with them, up to and including hundreds of thousands of dollars a year that you might spend on audits to be able to make them. But I think if you want to cut through a lot of that noise, getting to the consumer on what they are already trying to do. I mean, like I said, 80% of consumers are buying an organic item without knowing what it is. People are showing up at the register, paying a premium because they care enough to put their hard-earned dollars forward to do something that they think is going to be better for them or better for some group of stakeholders out there. And they're largely being underserved, and what they're getting is probably falling short of that value set. And so I think the gap is improving their awareness and understanding of the system around the things they already care about, and then connecting them to those things that they do. And I think for small or mid-sized producers, it's just storytelling. It's just relationship. It's just caring and being authentic and genuine and sincere on a set of issues, and recognizing that there's a whole group of consumers out there that are thoughtful and caring and sincere and aligned in those values and want desperately to support you if they can connect with you. And if you're that kind of maybe touches back into like what Force of Nature is and does. If you have a brand that's in a retail store in your region or in some restaurants, and you sell at a farmer's market and even have some direct to consumer online sales, great. You should do that. That's awesome. You should do whatever fits your context and your desires. You should have the option, but not the obligation, to do all of those things to ensure that your ends meet. And on the other end of the extreme, if you don't really want to deal with people and video calls and hire a staff to do branding and sales and distribution and production and all the rest of that, and you'd rather sit in a field of animals and listen to them chew and the wind blow and the birds sing, there are companies like Force of Nature out there that want to do the marketing and do all the rest of that stuff and connect you to those consumers for you. And so, I think there's a lot of paths to being able to find your way into being a part of that supply network and that system, and playing an important role in it. But again, I think the consumer is coming along. Again, going back to my point on the growth of organic, regenerative right now in its first decade or so is growing in volume at about 15% compounded annual growth rate. So it's coming on rapidly, and the growth and progress is very encouraging. And you're seeing more films and books and documentaries. And I would go as far as to say there's what I look at as like a renaissance on the land of trying to people leave the cities and go onto the land to celebrate some of this option and some of these outcomes and some of these improvements. At the same time, there is a system that's failing people and causing them to lose their land. And, we can get into the affordability of land as an entirely separate challenge and topic, but there's a lot of momentum behind what we're on this call terming the regenerative movement that I think is encouraging and representative of tailwinds for the people making those changes.
Well, I think for not having it all organized and put together in your head, that was pretty good of a connection of, a lot of huge concepts there as far as consumer interpretation and understanding of food labels and claims and how it fits into a producer's life as well. So I appreciate that greatly. I think that's the meat and potatoes of this podcast right there, what you said. So, Robby, I've really enjoyed having you on the show and talking about this. It's a little different than what we normally get to talk about. So, to wrap things up, I want to let people know where they can find more information about Force of Nature, maybe your rancher producer network and your products.
Yeah, we have a social media presence if that's your thing. So at Force of Nature Meats, we mostly put stuff out on Instagram. I would encourage folks that are on that platform to go check it out if you want to get a sense of who we are and what we stand for, how we are. Heck, copy us, emulate what we're doing if you're marketing to your consumers because it's working. If you want to see what we're talking about and how we're presenting it. We also have a blog, so you can go to our website, forceofnature.com. You can sign up for our blog or our newsletter. Again, you don't have to buy our stuff. I just want to connect you to information and to the conversation that I hope that you'll one day be a part of and a leader in. And so there's a couple of ways to connect with information there. For folks that are listening, that would be more on the consumer side. We sell products in retail across the country, across proteins. So if you have a favorite, beef, pork, or poultry supplier that you're supporting in your local community, in your CSA or at a farmer's market, great. Don't stop supporting them. But if they don't have a product you're looking for, we might have it in a grocery store near you. And I hope that we can help you out in the retail, or we sell direct to consumer, and we're selling the products of people in regions all across the country as well. So you are supporting community farms all over. And then we also have a podcast. We actually dive deep into some of these topics. Our podcast is called Where Hope Grows. We don't really heavily promote it, but I think there's actually some good content on there. There's some good content on, we go spend like 2 hours talking about just the principles of regenerative ag. We talk about a lot of interesting stuff on there, and folks may find some of that interesting. So again, most of it is about education. Most of it's about fostering connection to community and concepts and conversations. And so I hope you'll do that. And if you have any questions, we have a great team of people that can be resources. And if y'all want to reach out, we could probably connect you with somebody that could be helpful to you. And we hope you do that too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Robby.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed spending time with us today, please take a moment to review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or join the conversation on social media. Do you have a topic you would like to discuss or know someone with a story to share? Apply to be a guest on the podcast at farmingonpurpose.com. You can follow the host of Farming on Purpose, Lexi, on your favorite social media platforms for more content by searching for Farming on Purpose. And remember, if you look around your table and aren't inspired by the people there, it's time to find a new seat.